Charles Lindbergh started his military flying career in Texas. He arrived in San Antonio in 1924 to begin training at Brooks Field. He got there actually a month early, and so a friend suggested that the two of them might make a flying trip to California before classes started.
The easiest way for pilots to get to California in those days was for them to follow what they called the Iron Compass. And what they referred to as the Iron Compass was the main line of the Southern Pacific Railroad. Lindbergh started out from San Antonio headed westward, following those tracks. After he passed over Uvalde, Lindbergh spotted a river, and he thought it was the Rio Grande. He saw some railroad tracks on the east bank of the Rio Grande, and he thought those were the tracks of the Southern Pacific. Lindbergh turned and followed the river and the tracks. But Lindbergh's passenger pointed out after they'd been on this course for about half an hour that the tracks seemed to end at the next town, and it was a long way from California. Lindbergh admitted that they were lost. The river Lindbergh had mistaken for the Rio Grande was the Nueces, and the tracks he'd been following were those of the Uvalde and Northern. Lindbergh had no radio in his plane, and the only way he could find out where he was to land and ask somebody. They landed in a pasture, and a rancher told them they were in Camp Wood. Lindbergh planned to leave just as soon as he could fill up his gas tanks, but the people of Camp Wood persuaded him and his passenger to stay for dinner and spend the night. They did that, and the next morning they prepared to take off down the main street of Camp Wood. Telephone poles lined both sides of the street, but Lindbergh thought he could steer a course between the poles. He fired up the engine and started the old Canuck biplane rolling down the street. The plane was picking up speed when suddenly a wheel dropped into a rut. That caused the plane to veer off course, one wing hit a telephone pole, and the plane spun around and roared into a hardware store operated by a Mr. Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt did not ask Lindbergh to pay for the damage. He said the accident would make his store and Camp Wood famous. He may have been mistaken about the degree, but the mishap did attract some attention, and the store building is still standing there in Camp Wood. It took Lindbergh about a week to repair his plane. He flew on, and as far as we know, he never did visit Camp Wood again. But some people in Camp Wood still recall that week that Charles Lindbergh spent there in their town in 1924.
He landed way back down the other side of Gildart's store, the other side of Gildart's house down here. And then when he took off back at the lumberyard, went right back down, out down over Gildart's house.
On his takeoff, he hung his left wing on a telephone pole on J. Pewett's old hardware stores back across over here, and crashed into the side of his building. And then he had to order airplane dope from Houston to fix his plane, and after he got that, after about 3 or 4 days wait around here, he got his dope and borrowed sheets from the different people around over town here, and patched his plane back up and then took off from the little street that he attempted to take off from in the first place. But he gave quite a few of the people free rides around over town for appreciation for the accommodation he got while he was around town here.
He was here about, I guess about 5 or 6 days, something like that.
But anyway, I guess he had a good time. A bunch of them taking him out on the dance, I think, that first night he was here.
Him and the Gildart boys went out to the cave out here at this palace cave. They went through that.
I just remember that we had a cafe down there, and he happened here in town. And he told his boss said they eat at our place. And I didn't know nothing about that because I didn't work in the front. And he stayed here quite several days. And I just don't know how to tell it all.
3 years after he piled up in Camp Wood, Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. His name became known to millions of people around the world. But few of those other people ever got as close to him as some of the residents of Camp Wood.
The people of Camp Wood are still talking about Lindbergh's visit there, and there are markers in the little town recalling the Lindbergh episode. Camp Wood is about 100 miles west of San Antonio on State Highway 55. I'm Ray Miller, and I hope you'll be back with us at the same time next week to see some more of Texas.